And then he says, but honestly, all this focus on the debt ceiling instead of the future fiscal issue is like sitting on the beach at Santa Monica, worrying about whether a 30-foot wave will damage the pier when you know there's a 200-foot tsunami just 10 miles out. Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I've been observing economies, markets, currencies for over 30 years, most of my adult life. I worked in the markets for 25 years, as you know, following bond markets, interest rates, looking at how markets react to monetary, fiscal policy. And I have to say, I haven't seen an environment like the one we're in today for the major country, major reserve currency of the world. We're in uncharted waters. We have not just a debt ceiling situation that could be a temporary problem, but the bigger problem is the debt situation in the United States. And also, not to make it too disinteresting, we've got a banking collapse in our hands. Yes, that's what we're going to look at today. So with that, Rudy, I'm going to put you down. You can go back to snoozing if you want, and we're going to talk about something a little more serious. He likes staying under the desk now, Rudy. Yes, snuggled under the desk. So there you go. Yeah, there's a lot going on, of course. We've got the FOMC meeting today. I saw a tweet yesterday that lawmakers in Washington, D.C. were calling for Jay Powell not to raise rates, or the FOMC. We'll have to see what they do. Of course, that's coming out today at, I think, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. London time, where I am. I think they'll raise it by 25, but their language is going to open up the potential for a halt in the tightening of policy, which has led to this crisis. We've gone from 0% almost, virtually, in about just over a year to 5%. That's where I think we're going to be if they raise by 25, 5 to 5.25. And not to make it interesting, as I said earlier, we have a banking crisis on our hands. We saw First Republic yesterday had to be taken over by JP Morgan. They used the same playbook as the Swiss did. UBS took over Credit Suisse, but basically the government backstopped it. The government, the Federal Reserve, they say it's the FDIC, but the FDIC doesn't really have. The FDIC has been borrowing from the Fed. The Fed has been using the Treasury. It's all just like a smoke and mirrors. So, and that news came out yesterday, just after I finished recording. So yeah, JP Morgan got a good deal on the back of the taxpayer again, par for the course. And we saw also the banking indices. They've gone right through the low from earlier this year, which was when SVB, Signature Bank, and Silvergate collapsed. That was back in March. We've broken through those lows. Here you can see the KBW NASDAQ Bank Index. That has all the big banks in it. We're not too far away from the March 2020 low. That was around 60. We're at 76. Then you have the regional bank ETF, KRE. That's the ticker. That's gone through that March 2023 low about a couple of months ago or so, and we're very close to the March 2020 low. So it doesn't look good at all. And so not only have we got, as I said, a banking crisis, but we have a debt crisis. And it looks like the Biden administration doesn't want to negotiate. They just want a clean lift of the debt ceiling. What does that mean, clean? Well, no negotiations about any future spending, any future taxation, any future control of fiscal policy. And I'll play this for you. I thought it was really interesting. And if you want to listen to the whole thing, I recommend you follow me on Twitter. It's @Monaco1964. And I retweeted this, but I'll play this here. This is a senator. I don't know what his name is, but this is what he said.
Of the debt for the next 10 years, 50 cents. 50 cents out of every dollar of the debt will be used for nothing more than to pay interest on the debt.
So there you go. What he means is that the debt issued in the next 10 years, and the U.S. Treasury is always issuing debt because it's not paying off the debt, because we've been running, not just here in the UK, but also you guys in the US, you've been running deficits, huge deficits since '08. Yes, actually, during the Obama administration, the deficits kind of decreased, but then they started going up again, down in terms of red ink, of course. Even under the Trump administration, the last fiscal year of that administration, I think the budget deficit was 5% of GDP, and it's going to get worse. So what this means is that all the debt issued every year, half of that debt is just going to be used not to roll over the debt. Well, it's going to roll over the debt, but half of it is going to be used to pay the interest on the debt. And that's probably forecasting relatively low yields and interest rates. So it could be even worse. And I spoke to Clive Thompson a couple of weeks ago or so, and he showed me some CBO, Congressional Budget Office data, and this is pretty scary. Right now, the total national debt is just under 32 trillion, but there's something called debt held by the public, and that's at 24.2 trillion. That doesn't include the debt held by the Federal Reserve and other government agencies. But the CBO is forecasting that by 2023, that debt held by the public is going to be just under 50 trillion or 46.4 trillion. And if you add the other debt that's held by the Fed and other agencies, that will be way over 50 trillion. CBO, their forecasts are usually conservative. They usually get it wrong in terms of debt, in terms of inflation. So we could see a real problem here. And it's not just me talking about this. I've been warning about the debt tsunami here in the UK. It's not any different. It's going to be pretty bad. So we've got Stanley Druckenmiller. And who's Stanley Druckenmiller? Well, he's a famous hedge fund manager. He's done very well over the last 30, 40 years. He actually started out with George Soros, but that's not the point of this video. But he says Druckenmiller warns U.S. debt crisis worse than imagined. Billionaire investor says Fed is fueling reckless behaviors. U.S. fiscal problems go far beyond debt ceiling battles, he says. So this is not just worrying for the U.S. And what do we do in this situation? Well, hold as little currency as possible, because the currency is the other side of the debt. This is like Buenos Aires on the Potomac. You can see what has been happening to Buenos Aires in the last 50, 60 years. It used to be one of the richest countries in the world. at the turn of the last century. There's a saying that when you saw, I think it was a French saying, when you're in Paris and you saw a very rich individual driving a Rolls Royce or something, they would say, oh, look, there's an Argentinian. And now it's a basket case. Why? Well, because the government has been profligate, socialism, yes, it's all unraveled in the last 50 years. And I think there is no political will right now in the U.S. to turn things around, and I think it's too late. But let's read what Stanley Druckenmiller told Bloomberg. It's not a long article. Stanley Druckenmiller, the legendary hedge fund investor and longtime deficit hawk, said the current impasse over the debt ceiling is dwarfed by the dangers of unchecked future government spending. The fiscal recklessness of the last decade has been like watching a horror movie unfold. Druckenmiller, 69, who now runs his own Duquesne family office, said in a speech Monday at the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business. In a follow-up email, he said he hopes the U.S. government doesn't go into default. And then he says, but honestly, all this focus on the debt ceiling instead of the future fiscal issue is like sitting on the beach at Santa Monica, worrying about whether a 30-foot wave will damage the pier when you know there's a 200-foot tsunami just 10 miles out. Druckenmiller's comments echo those the billionaire investor gave a decade ago during a tour of 14 university campuses when he encouraged students to pay attention to ballooning federal deficits that he believed could bankrupt future generations. He said at the time that the economic storm spurred by reckless spending could dwarf the economic pains of 2008. The situation today looks much worse than I had imagined 10 years ago, he said on Monday. The big issue is entitlements such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which without cuts today will have to be slashed in the future, he said. In the speech, he expressed concerns about the Biden administration's plans to deal with potential shortfalls, as well as the lack of fiscal restraint by the Republican Party. So on the question of the entitlements, well, I think what he's trying to say is that you're not going to be getting what you were promised. There's either going to have to be a cut. The other way to get what you were promised in nominal terms is for the money printing to kick into gear again. And yes, you're going to get $100, but the $100 is not going to buy you that much. And there's more. It's not just the entitlements. That's the problem, the reckless spending. It's been all the bailouts as well of multi-billionaires, and he's benefited from it. And I'm sure he knows about this, but that's the way it has been. Spending on seniors will reach 100% of federal tax revenues by 2040. 100% of tax revenues. Based on Congressional Budget Office estimates, he said, including interest expense. What's more, the current 31 trillion US debt load doesn't account for future entitlement payments. Accounting for the present value of that burden, the debt load is more like 200 trillion. There you go. Druckenmiller also questions the actions of the Federal Reserve, saying the agency's easy money policies over the past decade created reckless behavior in financial markets, governments, and banks. Couldn't agree more, but there's always an excuse, Mr. Druckenmiller. In 2008, the excuse was we can't let the banks go under. And then in 2020, we can't let the banks go under again. It's always saving the very wealthy. Well, and also homeowners, I would say. making sure interest rates were low enough. That's part of all this money printing. Unfortunately, still by owning a large amount of government debt, the Fed continues to create the false illusion that it can help with our fiscal problems, he said. While raising rates 5 percentage points in the past year was a move in the right direction, trying to correct the biggest mistake in Fed history, Druckenmiller questioned the central bank's resolve to stick to its gun. At the first signs of trouble, the Fed last month, that was in March, and in just 4 days, undid most of the progress they had made in reducing their balance sheet. That was when they did $400 billion in a week of QE. This asymmetric Fed response is what feeds the lack of serious structural action in DC from both sides of the aisle. So, as I said, these are uncharted waters. We've never been through this Cape Horn situation. What do you do? Well, as I've been saying for many years here on this channel, live within your means, save. Yeah, a lot of people think, well, interest rates are really low, we're going to have inflation, why not take on a lot of debt and the inflation will write it off? Well, the problem with that is that on the way to the write-off of the debt, you could be insolvent yourself. So always try to pay down debt, have very little debt, as little as possible. I know it's hard. Have some, of course, gold and silver outside the system. And it's much more than just gold and silver. It's more about where you live, how you interact with your community. It's going to be, I don't know how it's going to be, because we've never had the major reserve currency, the major economy in the world probably collapse like this. So all I can say is batten down the hatches and be nice to each other. There's going to be a lot of blame game. And this is, of course, the current administration is probably hammering the last nail in the coffin, but this has been happening, I would say, for almost 100 years. It started out, I would say, with the New Deal and all the, that's where all the entitlement situation started. All the wars haven't helped, all the bailouts. So it's not just one administration, it's a series of administration. It's also the mindset that the public wants something. And they like the inflation. They don't want to see recessions. And unfortunately, they've been conditioned by the powers that be, by the media, by the culture. You can have it all. The American dream. And I'm not just having a go at America. It's happened here in the UK and in the rest of the world as well. So that's how I see things. Let's wait and see what the Fed does later on today. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.